European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830–1839. 1. The Belgian Revolt, 1830–1839. The Belgian Revolution of 1830 was an uprising that was organized by the Belgians against their Dutch masters in 1830 in reaction to the forced union of the two countries by the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840–1815 into the United Kingdom of Netherlands or Holland. This union was led by King William I, who was a Dutch. The two countries had been united to create a strong nation in the northeast of France that would resist against the French aggression. The revolution was staged against the Dutch in Brussels, which was the capital of Belgium. By 1839, Belgium was declared a neutral and independent state. The Union was also formed to try and punish Belgium owing to her close alliance to France during the Revolutionary and Napoleonic era. It was also meant to reward the Dutch Holland for her efforts in defeating Napoleon I. NB. However, this merger union brought together countries that were traditionally different in the political, social, economic, and religious life. This unfair arrangement of the Vienna Pale settlement later aroused Belgian nationalism driven by the desire to retain independence from the Dutch, and this made the outbreak of Belgian Revolt of 1830 inevitable. The union government between Holland and Belgium had the following terms. Belgium and Holland were joined together as equal provinces, and therefore no single state could dominate the other. The union government was to be headed by the Dutch king. Political liberties and religious freedoms were to be observed. The union government was to have a rational parliament, i.e. the parliament was supposed to meet on Dutch soil as well as on the Belgian territory. The two provinces of the Union were to exchange commercial rights and privileges. The two provinces were to share public debt equally. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830–1839. 2. The causes of 1830 Belgian Revolution. 1. The unfair arrangement of the Vienna Peace Settlement of 80,141,815 led to the outbreak of the Belgian Revolt in 1830. The Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840–1,850 made a mistake of forming a union of Belgium and Holland so as to create a strong buffer state in the northeast of France known as the United Kingdom of Netherlands. The Vienna peacemakers ignored the fact that those two states had people of different historical, social, cultural, and economic backgrounds. This therefore caused a revolution, as the Belgians demanded for an independent and separate state from the Dutch. Hence the unfair Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840–15 partly led to the out of the 1830 Belgian Revolt. 2. The political discrimination against the Belgians by the Dutch also caused the 1830 Belgian Revolution. The Dutch monopolized all the official positions in the government like the army, civil service, and the diplomatic mission. For instance, out 7 cabinet ministers, 6 were Dutch and only 1 Belgian, also 30 out of 39 ambassadors were Dutch, and all the generals in the army of the kingdom were Dutch, i.e. 1,800 out of 2,000 army officers were Dutch. All the 9 generals in the army were Dutch. Therefore, such political discrimination couldn't be tolerated by the Belgians, hence partly forcing them to stage the Belgian Revolt in 1830 against their masters, the Dutch. 3. The payment of the national debt also angered the Belgians, forcing them to revolt in 1830 against their Dutch masters. It should be noted that before the Union, the Dutch had accumulated a big national debt. What caused conflict was if King William I forced the Belgians to contribute to the repayment of this debt, which would have been a responsibility of the Dutch alone. The Belgians saw no reason for paying the debt from which they had not benefited, i.e. the Belgians were meant to share this debt burden equally, something that partly forced them to revolt in 1830 against their masters, the Dutch. 4. The influence of the French Revolution of 1789 over the Belgians also led to the outbreak of the Belgian Revolt in 1830. The French. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830–1839. 3. Example of the French Revolution of 1789 encouraged the Belgians to revolt against the Dutch oppression in 1830. 5. The success of the July 1830 revolt in France was the immediate cause of the Belgian Revolt of 1830. It should be noted that in 1830 the French staged a revolution against King Charles X, who had succeeded Louis Roman XVIII in 1824. Among other key things, they accused Charles X of being autocratic. Therefore, when the news of the overthrow of Charles X reached the Belgians, it inspired them to rise up in the rebellion against their Dutch oppressors, seeking similar success like that of the French, hence partly contributing to the outbreak of 1830 Belgian Revolt. 6. The desire for liberalism also contributed to the outbreak of 1830 Belgian Revolution. The government of King William I, for instance, put in place discriminative laws that tampered with people's liberty, i.e. censorship of the Belgian press or newspapers. The liberal journalists therefore opposed the censorship laws because while the Belgian newspapers were censored, those of the Dutch were not. This therefore angered the Belgians, who finally decided to stage a revolt in 1830 against their Dutch masters. 7. The economic difference between the Belgians and the Dutch led to the outbreak of the 1830 Belgian Revolt. The Belgians were industrialists and miners and had developed because of industrialization, while the Dutch were farmers and traders and were therefore less developed compared to the Belgians. The Belgians, being industrialists, therefore preferred a protective economic policy that would safeguard their infant industries. On the other hand, the Dutch were predominantly commercial and farmers, and to them they preferred the free trade policy, which would enable them to get free manufactured goods and foodstuffs. King William I therefore introduced a free trade policy, and Belgians feared the loss of market for their manufactured goods due to competition with cheap foreign products that were not taxed, hence forcing the Belgians to revolt in 1830 against the Dutch. 8. Also, conflict over the control of education also led to the outbreak of the Belgian Revolt, PF 1830. It should be noted that before the Union was created in 1815, United Kingdom of Netherlands, education in Belgium was controlled by the Catholic Church. And European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 4 Protestant administrators. Therefore, the dominance of the education system by the Dutch annoyed the Belgians, hence they revolted against the Dutch in 1830. 9. The differences in religion also contributed to the outbreak of the Belgian Revolt of 1830. It should be noted that the Dutch were Protestants while the Belgians were mainly Catholics. However, in the Union government, which was dominated by the Dutch, Protestant was made the state religion. Protestants were favoured in appointments, recruitment and promotions into public offices against the Catholic Belgians. It was this religious bias that partly forced then Belgians to stage the Belgian Revolt of 1830 in search for worship. 10. The unfair parliamentary system also contributed to the outbreak of the Belgian Revolt of 1830. The Belgians were about 3.5 million people, but were made to have equal representatives in Parliament with the Dutch, who were only 2 million people. That was a violation of democracy, because the Belgians deserved to have more representatives in Parliament. Besides, the Parliament always met at The Hague in Holland and never at Brussels in Belgium, and this was against the terms of the Union Constitution because the Parliament was meant to be rotational, something that greatly angered the Belgians, forcing them to revolt against the Dutch masters in 1830. 11. The Dutch imperialism and domination also roused Belgian nationalism in 1830. The Union government, United Kingdom of Netherlands, was dominated by the duchy. It was headed by the Dutch king from the House of Orange dynasty, who favoured fellow Dutch in political appointments. In the same way, the Belgians were sidelined in appointments to high posts in the public service, the army, and diplomatic field. This unwise domination and discrimination by King William I of Holland gave the Belgians a legitimate reason to revolt in 1830. 12. The unfair taxation system also contributed to the outbreak of the Belgian Revolt in 1830. The Belgians revolted partly due to the unnecessary heavy taxes taxed on them. The Belgians. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 5 angered the Belgians and partly forced them to stage the revolt in 1830 against their masters, the Dutch. 13. The desire for independence by the Belgians also made the Belgians to revolt in 1830. It should be noted and recalled that the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-1815 had undermined the independence of Belgium when it put the Belgians under foreign domination of the Dutch. Therefore, the oppressive Dutch foreign rule over the Belgians made them determined to take the bull by the horns and fight for their independence from the Dutch, thus leading to the outbreak of the Belgian Revolt of 1830. 14. The difference in race also caused the 1830 Belgian Revolt. It should be noted that there was a difference in race between the Dutch and the Belgians, i.e. the Dutch belonged to the Teutonic race, Germanic peoples, while the Belgians belonged to the Latin race. Therefore, the difference in race brought conflicts between the Dutch and Belgians, i.e. the Belgians greatly identified and emphasized that the Teutonic race of the Dutch was inferior to theirs, and therefore hated a situation where they were put under the leadership of inferior Dutch, yet them were from superior. Hence, the different race made the Belgians to fight for their own independence, thus leading to the outbreak 1830 Belgian Revolution. 15. The collapse of the Congress system in 1830 also led to the outbreak of Belgian Revolt in 1830. This is because it weakened the Metternich system that had been used to suppress the forces of liberalism and nationalism in Europe. A collapse meant that European 5 big powers, i.e. BR, FR, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, could no longer unite to suppress revolutions in Europe, something that encouraged the Belgians to revolt in 1830. By 1830, the Congress system or concept of Europe had almost collapsed, and congressmen were no longer congressing due to selfish interest and disagreements. The disagreements and differences in the Congress system were exploited by the Belgians to successfully revolt against the Dutch. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 6 revolutionary condemned and attacked the discriminative, exploitative, and oppressive policies of King William I's Dutch administration against the Belgians. He therefore mobilized the Belgian masses to rise up against the Dutch domination, and he also sought for foreign support, especially from France under King Louis Philippe, though he refused, hence the role of Polygonal made the outbreak of 1830 Belgian Revolt imitable. 17. The difference in language also caused the 1830 revolt in Belgian, After the union of the Dutch and the begins to form the United Kingdom of Netherlands, the Dutch language was made an official language, and it should be noted that these communities spoke different languages, i.e. the Dutch language for the Dutch and French language for Belgians. And when the Dutch language was made a nation, an official language in the United Kingdom of Netherlands, the Belgians hated this, i.e. Dutch language of communication in schools, parliament offices, palaces of work, court of law, etc., and more annoying the Belgians didn't understand. This language hence partly forcing the Belgians' 1832 stage a revolt against their master the Dutch. The cause of the Belgian Revolution of 1830. On 16 August 1830, Belgians revolted against the Dutch and revolution started in Brussels, which was the capital of Belgium. In September 1830, Brussels came under the Belgian control. On 4th October 1830, a new constitution was formed in which a monarchy was established and there was to be a parliament, freedom of speech and press among other fundamental liberties. This constitutional arrangement made the Belgians happy, hence encouraging them to fight. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830–1839. 7. The Union King William I of Holland then sent his son the Prince of Orange to Brussels to calm down the Belgians, because the prince popular in Belgium, but he failed to make any positive progress. In September 1830, the Belgians gained complete control of Brussels. They defeated a force of 10,000 Dutch troops that had been sent by King William I to crush the revolt. On 4th October 1830, the Belgian nationalists and liberals proclaimed the independence and separation of Belgium from Holland, and a provisional government was formed. Thereafter, national elections for the Belgian Parliament were organised, and in November 1830, the National Congress voted by the Belgians met in Brussels to draft a new constitution for Belgium. The Belgian National Congress decided that the Belgium be run with a national monarchy with liberal constitution granting all forms of liberties, and other liberals in Europe welcomed the Belgian liberal constitution. On 4th November 1831, a conference was held in London during which Great Britain and France recognized the independence of Belgium. Britain and France also rejected the appeal by King William I of Holland for military help to suppress the revolt. They also ignored the opposition of conservative Russia, Austria, and Prussia. However, King William I never accepted the loss of the Belgium, and therefore he sent Dutch troops under the command of his son Prince of Orange to invade Belgium. However, France and Britain had formed a military alliance to protect the Belgians against the Dutch. Military support was offered by Louis Philippe of France, and the British naval force blockaded the Dutch coast and the city of Antwerp. This show of force brought the Dutch to her knees. In May 1833, the Dutch formally accepted Belgian independence. In 1838, King William I of Holland signed a formal recognition of Belgian independence. The final stage of the Belgian struggle for independence was in 1839, when all European powers, i.e. Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830–1839. 8. Leopold of Saxe-Coburg became the first king of Belgium with the title Leopold, and at 40 years he married the daughter of King Louis Philippe, the King of France. Effects of the 1830 Belgian Evolution. The Belgian Evolution of 1830 had positive and negative effects on the political, social, and economic structures of Belgium and Europe as a whole. 1. The Dutch were defeated, and this enabled the Belgians to regain their independence in 1839. The Belgians fought and repulsed the Dutch invasion several times. This made King William I of Holland to bow to the pressure from Britain and France, and in 1839, in the London Conference, King William I formally recognized the independence and neutrality of Belgium. 2. The Belgian Revolt of 1830 led to the redrawing of the map of Europe in 1839. A new state was born on the European continent when Belgium was recognized as an independent and neutral state by European big powers, i.e. Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia at the London Conference of 1839. Although Belgium was declared a neutral state, she remained important in European affairs, and she became a source of interest to European powers, e.g. Britain was made to join World War I in 1915 after Germany violated this neutrality and invaded Belgium while trying to attack France. 3. Belgium was declared a constitutional monarchy with Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, an uncle to the Queen of Britain, as the first king. A new Belgian constitution was drafted with 18 articles, and it emphasized the equality of all by nature. The constitution established an independent constitutional monarchy with 3 independent arms of government, i.e. an executive, elected parliament, and independent judiciary. This liberal constitution. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830–1839. 9. 5. The Belgian Revolt of 1830 revived the spirit of European diplomacy that had almost died out with the collapse of the Congress system in 1830. However, the Belgian Revolt created a crisis that necessitated European power to come together and settle it. The revolt therefore led to the calling of the London Conference of 1831 and later the London Conference of 1839, which formed a lasting solution to the Belgian question. Therefore, the Belgian Revolt led to the calling of the London Conference of 1839, which revived the European diplomacy. 6. The 1830 Belgian Revolt forced Britain to abandon her policy of isolation and non-intervention in the affairs of other countries. British Prime Minister Lord George Canning had adopted a policy of isolation as long as British interests were not in danger. However, the outbreak of the Belgian Revolt forced Britain to abandon that policy because of the interest shared with Belgium, and that's why Britain, under its Prime Minister Palmerston, organised the London Conferences of 1831 and 1839 that granted Belgium independence. 7. The success of the 1830 Belgian Revolt increased British involvement and influence in European and Belgian affairs. Britain influenced the installing of Leopold of Saxe-Coburg as the Belgian king because he was related to the Queen of Britain, and thereafter Britain used that opportunity to change the balance of power and influence from Vienna to London, and that's why Britain held the London Conferences that granted independence to Greece in 1832, to Belgium in 1839, and also held the 1840 and 1841 London Conferences that settled the Syrian question. 8. The 1830 Belgian Revolt partly contributed to the success of Greek War of Independence War. The Greek war against their Turkish masters started way back in 1821, and by 1830 they were still fighting. The outbreak of the Belgian Revolt of 1830 somehow. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 10. 9. The Belgian Revolt of 1830 weakened the Dutch economically. Economically, the Dutch could no longer exploit the Belgian resources, e.g. through taxes on the Belgians. Besides, the Belgians adopted a protectionist economic policy, thereby denying the Dutch any further exploitation and dependency on Belgian industries, and this negatively impacted on the Dutch economy. 10. The Belgian Revolt of 1830 promoted the development and industrialization of Belgium, i.e. the declaration of the Belgian independence and neutrality freed her from the Dutch exploitation, thereby favouring Belgian economic development. Independent. Belgium became free to adopt a protectionist policy and safeguarded her infant industries from foreign competition. This later turned Belgium into an economic giant, second to Britain in Europe before the unification of Germany in 1871. 11. Belgium's policy of economic protectionism negatively impacted on the economies of Europe in the short run. Her protectionist policy undermined international trade between Belgium and other European countries. Nevertheless, in the long run, Belgium industrialized and her economy flourished. 12. After 1830 Belgian Revolt, the welfare and standard of living of the people in Europe improved, i.e. after the revolution, trade flourished in Europe. Free trade treaties were signed with leading economies of Europe, e.g. with Britain, France and Denmark, and this international trade created employment opportunities to the Belgians and other European masses, thereby increasing and improving their welfare and standard of living. 13. The 1830 Belgian Revolt exposed or revealed the unfairness and weakness of the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-1815. It should be recalled the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-1815 had unrealistically placed the Belgians under the Dutch rule so as to create a buffer state to check on future French aggression in the northeast of France. However, this unrealistic arrangement was exposed when the Belgians rose up against the Dutch in 1832. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 11 became divided over the Belgian question as Britain and France supported the Belgians while the conservative powers, i.e. Austria, Russia and Prussia, were opposed to the Belgian Revolt and they desired to suppress it. This division of Congress powers over the Belgian question undermined the elements of unity in the Congress system and partly contributed to its collapse in 1830. 15. The Belgian Revolt of 1830 led to the loss of lives and destruction of property. The Belgian revolutionaries became rowdy, noisy and disorderly and destroyed important places like the Opera House. On the other hand, King William I of Holland sent the Dutch troops that on several occasions confronted the Belgian revolutionaries and in the process led to loss of lives on both sides and destruction of property. 16. The Belgian Revolution of 1830 solved the boundary conflicts that had existed between Belgium and Holland. For instance, the London Treaty of 1839 fixed the Belgian boundaries, e.g. Belgium was given the western part of Luxembourg went to Holland. Belgium was also given free navigation of River Scheldt while Holland kept control of the mouth of the River Scheldt. 17. The Belgians' revolt of 1830's success weakened the Metternich system and exposed its weaknesses. In 1820, Prince Metternich had convinced conservative powers to sign Tropa Protocol, i.e. Russia, Austria and Prussia, where they agreed to intervene and suppress any revolt wherever it occurred. However, the success of the Belgian Revolt of 1830 exposed the weaknesses of the Tropa Protocol and the conservative Metternich system. 18. The Belgian Revolt of 1830 revealed the triumph of forces of liberalism and nationalism over reactionary or conservative powers in Europe. Forces of liberalism and nationalism were ushered in by the French of 1789, and from then onwards there was a struggle between the new forces of change, liberalism and nationalism, against old forces of conservatism led by Prince Metternich. However, the success of the Belgian Revolt of 1830 was a sign of success of the forces of liberalism and nationalism. European history at the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. Well, Philippe to assist the Belgians, but Louis-Philippe delayed, and later on the Belgians offered their throne to Louis-Philippe, son Duke of Nemours, Prince Louis. However, he decided the offer in favour of the British candidate Leopold of Saxe-Coburg and uncle of Queen Victoria of England. This frustrating foreign policy angered the French glory-seekers, liberals and Catholics, who later became critics of Louis-Philippe's reign and consequently contributed to his downfall by 1848. 20. The Belgian Revolt of 1830's success inspired the outbreak of subsequent revolutions in Europe. The success of the Belgian Revolt was a direct violation of the unfair arrangement of the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-1815, and this inspired European masses to also revolt in an attempt to end the unfair arrangement of the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-1815. E.g., it inspired the outbreak of the 1830 revolts in Poland, Italian states, Germany states. It inspired the outbreak of the 1848 revolts, as well as the 1917 Russian Revolution. 21. The Belgian Revolution of 1830 led to the creation of marriage alliances in Europe between France and Britain after failing to secure the Belgian crown for his son Duke of Nemours, Louis. Philippe accepted to marry off his daughter Louis to the Belgian King Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, who was an uncle of Queen Victoria of Britain, and this created a marriage alliance between Britain and France. Summary of the effects of 1830 Belgian Revolt. The Dutch were defeated, redrawing the map of Europe. Belgium declared a constitutional monarchy. Dutch domination ended. Revived European diplomacy. Revealed triumph of liberalism and nationalism. Weakened Metternich system. Solved boundary conflicts. Creation of marriage alliances. Success of Creek War of Independence. Promoted independence and development. European history, the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. 13. Loss of lives and destruction of property. Undermined popularity of Louis-Philippe, weakened Dutch econ and military, weakened the Congress system, etc. Questions. 1. Assess the impact of the Belgian Revolt of 1830 on Europe. 2. Why and how did the Belgians revolt against the Dutch? Why reasons or causes of 1830 Belgian Revolt? How give the course of the 1830 Belgian Revolt? NB. The question calls for causes and course of 1830 Belgian Revolt. Question 3. Why were the Belgians able to retain independence by 1839? Reasons for the success of 1830 Belgian Revolt. The reasons for the success of 1830 Belgian Revolt. 1. The unity between the Belgian revolutionaries led to the success of the Belgian Revolution in 1839. The Belgian Catholics and liberals agreed to unite for the common cause and development of the Belgians, and these two groups had support from the Belgian masses. Therefore, unity of Belgian nationalists partly enabled them to stage a successful revolt in 1839. 2. The numerical advantage of the Belgians contributed to the success of their revolt. The Belgians comprised about 3.5 million people, which was 2/3 of the total population in the Union government, compared to the Dutch, who were only 2 million. This means that the Belgians were able to mobilize more resources and masses to join the struggle for independence, hence the numerical advantage of the Belgians partly contributed to the success of 1830 Belgian Revolt. 3. The strength of the Belgian economy was also responsible for the success of the Belgian Revolution in 1839. It was an industrialized economy compared to the Dutch, who had a poor agricultural and seafaring economy. The Belgians were able to train and raise a strong army which was able to defeat the Dutch forces, and besides, European history, the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. 14. 4. The 1830 Belgian Revolt was well coordinated and planned. The Belgian revolutionaries planned their revolt in the sense that when a revolt broke out in Brussels, other spontaneous revolts broke out in other towns of Belgium, and in the end they overwhelmed the Dutch forces that were unable to contain the Belgian nationalists, and enabling the Belgians to succeed in their revolt in 1839. 5. The weakness and collapse of the Congress system was a blessing in disguise to the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. By 1830, the Congress system had been weakened due to disagreement among the powers, with some powers in support of the Belgian revolt, i.e. Britain and France, while other conservative powers were against the revolt, i.e. Austria, Prussia and Russia. The Belgian revolutionaries exploited such weaknesses to stage a successful revolt without external intervention. 6. Genuine grievances of the Belgians also revolt a success. The Belgians were genuinely fighting against the unfair arrangements of the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-15 that had imposed Dutch control over them. Besides, the Dutch rule was exploitative, oppressive and discriminative against the Belgians. Such prevailing conditions in the Union government of the Netherlands justifiably encouraged the Belgians to revolt with the support of European powers, hence leading to their success in 1839. 7. The Belgian Revolt had massive support from the Belgians. Almost all groups of people in Belgium, e.g. the peasants, the liberals, the Catholics, the intellectuals, and the army supported the Belgian cause because they were grieved by the Dutch domination and oppression over them. Therefore, this massive support of the Belgian cause partly contributed to the success of the revolt in 1839. 8. The military strength of the Belgian army also accounted for the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. Due to her strong economy, Belgium was able to build a large, well-trained, equipped and motivated army which with the help of French and British troops and navy was able to defeat the Dutch forces, hence leading to the success of 1830 Belgian Revolt in 1839. 9. The determination of the Belgians to achieve their independence also led to the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. The desire. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 15. 10. The role played by France and Louis-Philippe also contributed to the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. The Frenchmen supported the Belgium with the hope of weakening the barrier created against France and also to annex Belgium into France. Besides, Louis-Philippe threw his son's choice over Belgian throne in favour of Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, who was the British choice. That therefore reduced tension between Britain and France, which enabled them to jointly work together in support of the Belgian Revolt, hence leading to the success of the revolt in 1839. 11. Britain played a big role towards the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. The British government supported the revolt because she did not want any foreign intervention of another power that would endanger her interests. Britain was also quick to organise the London Conference of 1839 that guaranteed Belgium independence and neutrality, hence leading to the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. 12. The unpopular policies of King William I of Holland also led to the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. King William I passed oppressive, exploitative and discriminative policies over the Belgians that were even resented by fellow Dutch Protestants. In the end, the Belgians got support and sympathy from Dutch liberals who supported them because of the unfair policies of King William I, and that enabled them to stage a successful revolt because King William I lost support due to his unfair policies. 13. The absence of the French threat in Europe led to the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. The Union government, United Kingdom of Netherlands, had been formed to create a barrier against future French aggression. However, by 1830, France was no longer a threat to European peace, and therefore there was no need to still maintain a buffer state, and that's why some European powers like Britain supported the Belgians, leading to the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. 14. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 16. 15. The defeat of the Dutch troops in 1831 partly contributed to the success of the Belgian revolutionaries. King William I refused to acknowledge the independence of Belgium that was declared by Britain and France during the London Conference of 1831. He then later sent the Dutch troops to suppress the revolt, but the Dutch troops were defeated by a combined force of French forces and the British Navy, hence leading to the success of Belgian Revolt in 1839. 16. The declaration of Belgium as a constitutional monarchy rather than a republic also contributed to the success of the revolt in 1839. The Belgian liberals were wise to declare a constitutional monarchy which guaranteed basic freedoms and liberties of the Belgians. This constitutional monarchy was accepted by European powers, especially Britain, who could have opposed a republican government that would have been a source of instability in Europe and a threat to European monarchies, hence leading to the success of the revolt in 1839. 17. The London Conference of 1839 was the immediate factor that led to the success of the revolt. In 1839, European powers signed the London Treaty of 1839 that clearly defined the boundaries of Belgium with her neighbours like Holland, and that London Treaty guaranteed the independence and neutrality of Belgium, hence contributing to the success of the revolt in 1839. 18. The success of the previous revolutions in Europe also led to the success of the Belgian Revolt in 1839. The success of the French Revolution of 1789 as well as the Paris Revolt of 1830 July 1830 revolt gave the Belgians inspiration to revolt against the Dutch domination, and that made the Belgian nationalists to fight with high hopes, also expecting success like the case was in the previous revolt, hence leading to success of 1830 Belgian Revolt. Questions for reference. 1. Examine the causes and effects of the 1830 Belgian Revolt, i.e. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 17. 5. How did the Belgians get their independence from the Dutch? 6. Why and how did the Belgians revolt against the Dutch? 7. Account for the success of the Belgians in their struggle for independence by 1839. 8. Why were the Belgians able to attain independence by 1839? Etc. The Polish Revolution of 1830. The Polish Revolt of 1830 was a rebellion which the Polish staged against Russian oppressive rule. In the period before 1815, Poland had been subject to partition by various European powers, and the last one being the one of 1795, where she was ruled by Prussia and Austria. In 1807, Napoleon I's Treaty of Tilsit with Russia had transformed Poland into the Grand Duchy of Warsaw with a new constitution. During the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-15, the Russian Tsar wanted to restore the King of Poland, and that was accepted to restore Saxony to Poland. The Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-1815 therefore agreed that Poland be placed under Russian control. However, Russia's maladministration of Poland forced the Poles to revolt in 1830. The causes of Polish Revolution of 1830. 1. The desire for national independence by the Poles led to the Polish Revolt of 1830. It should be noted that since 1772 Poland had been under foreign rule, and it kept on changing hands from one big country to another during Napoleon I's rule. European powers like European history, the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. 18. This unfair arrangement of the Vienna Peace Settlement forced the Poles to revolt in 1830 and demand for their independence. 3. The religious difference between the Poles and the Russians also led to the revolt in 1830. It should be noted that the Poles were staunch Catholics while the Russians were Orthodox Christians. However, the Russians had made the Orthodox religion to be the state religion in Poland, thereby denying the Poles their freedom of worship, which created discontent among the Poles and forced them into rebellion against their Russian masters, hence partly leading to the outbreak of 1830 Polish Revolt. 4. The language differences also partly contributed to the outbreak of the Polish Revolt in 1830. Tsar Alexander I of Russia had allowed the Poles to use their Polish language as their national language. However, his successor Tsar Nicholas I abolished the use of the Polish language and instead enforced the use of the Russian language by the Poles, which created anger and drove the Poles into rebellion in 1830. 5. The influence of Napoleon I's reforms in Poland also led to outbreak of the 1830 Polish Revolt. It should be noted that Napoleon I had made a number of reforms in the Grand Duchy of Warsaw he had created in 1807 and also spread the French revolutionary ideas there. These Napoleonic reforms politically awakened the Poles, i.e. equality, fraternity, and liberty, and when the Russian administration tried to abolish some of these reforms, there was resentment from the Poles, hence forcing them to stage the 1830 revolt. 6. Russia's despotic rule dictatorship over the Poles also led to the outbreak of the Polish Revolt of 1830. Tsar Alexander I was somehow liberal towards the Poles. He allowed them to retain the Polish flag, to use the Polish language as a national language. He allowed the Poles to have a constitution and parliament. However, his successor Tsar Nicholas I went on gradually abolishing these freedoms and liberties and instead established Russian dictatorial rule that drove the Polish into revolting in 1830. 7. The death of Tsar Alexander I Russia in 1825 also led to the outbreak of the Polish Revolt in 1830. During his administration, Tsar Alexander I allowed a reasonable level of liberties to the Poles. European history, the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. 19 Poles. However, following his death, his successor Tsar Nicholas I abolished all these liberties, and this aggrieved the Poles, partly forcing them to revolt against Russian domination in 1830. 8. The rise of Tsar Nicholas I to the Russian throne also contributed to the outbreak of the Polish Revolt in 1830. Unlike his father, who had allowed the Poles to enjoy some liberties, Tsar Nicholas I was outrightly unpopular in Poland because of his brutal rule. He denied the Poles most of the liberties that they had enjoyed during the reign of Tsar Alexander I. He also brutally killed many people who were suspected to have conspired to kill his father Tsar Alexander I in 1825. This brutality by Tsar Nicholas I created hatred among the Polish nationalists, and that drove them into staging a revolt in 1830. 9. The Polish belief that they were a superior race also made them to stage the revolt of 1830 against the Russians. The Poles believed that they were very superior to the Russians who were ruling them, and therefore they were proud of their culture. This superiority feeling among the Poles encouraged them to revolt against their Russian masters, who they considered to be inferior, so as to protect the Polish culture. 10. The censorship of the Polish press also contributed to the outbreak of the 1830 Polish Revolt. The Polish press newspapers would expose the weaknesses of the Russian administration, and therefore he decided to censor it, which angered the Poles and forced them into revolting in 1830. 11. The role of the Polish intellectuals also contributed to the Polish Revolt of 1830. The intellectual included, among others, university professors and students, especially from the University of Warsaw. The intellectuals did much to expose the evils of the Russian administration in Poland, and that helped to create a revolutionary mood among the Polish. They also mobilized and coordinated the masses to revolt against the Russian domination in 1830. 12. The political discrimination of the Polish by the Russians also forced the Polish to revolt in 1830. It should be noted that European history, the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. 20. Allowed to operate by his father Tsar Alexander I, but when he assumed the Russian throne, he dissolved the Polish parliament in 1825 and its seating was suspended and its powers were restricted. Therefore, this violation of Polish parliamentary democracy created discontent among the Poles to revolt in 1830. 14. The widespread economic hardships in Poland also led to the outbreak of the Polish Revolt in 1830. It should be noted that, by 1830, the Poles were faced with a number of economic hardships such as inflation, massive unemployment, poverty, etc. However, the Russian administration did little to solve those problems, and this partly angered the Poles, forcing them to revolt in 1830. 15. The desire by the Poles to regain their political, social, and economic privileges also forced them to revolt in 1830. During the reign of Tsar Alexander I, the Polish were allowed to enjoy some liberties and privileges, however these were eroded by Tsar Nicholas I. Many Poles were removed from administrative posts. They were also removed from the army. They were denied tax exemptions, leaving the Russians to enjoy these privileges. This, therefore, left the Poles aggrieved and partly drove them into staging a revolt so as to regain their privileges. 16. The inspiration from the 1789 French Revolution in France also led to the outbreak of the Polish Revolt in 1830. The French Revolution of 1789 came along with revolutionary ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity, democracy, etc., and these ideas influenced the Poles to rise up against their Russian tormentors, hence leading to the outbreak of the Polish Revolt in 1830. 17. The success of the 1830 revolts in France and Belgium also inspired the Poles to rise up against Russian rule. The success of the Paris Revolt of 1830 and the Belgian Revolt of 1830 inspired the Poles to revolt, hoping for similar success like in these previous revolts. 18. The failure of Tsar Nicholas I to add Lithuania to the Polish territory also made the Poles to revolt in 1830. During the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-1815, Tsar Alexander I of Russia had been promised by European powers that the territory of Lithuania would be added to the Kingdom of Poland. However, his successor, Tsar Nicholas I, failed to acquire Lithuania for Poland, which left the Polish glory seekers and industrialists angry, and that partly made them to join the 1830 revolt against Russian foreign rule. 19. The weakness and eventual collapse of the Congress system by 1830 also led to the outbreak of the Polish Revolt of 1830. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 21 should be noted that the Congress system had been formed partly to guard Europe against the rising forces of liberalism and nationalism. However, by 1830, the Congress system had collapsed due to disagreements among the Congress powers, i.e. Britain, France, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Therefore, this institutional vacuum encouraged the Poles to revolt against Russian foreign domination in 1830. Question: the Russification policy of Tsar Nicholas I was largely responsible for the outbreak of the Polish Revolt of 1830. Discuss. Introduction. Russification. Other factors. Tsar Nicholas I's role. Censored the press. Dissolved the Polish parliament. Imposed Russian language. Religious intolerance. Abolished Polish privileges. Administrative discrimination. Other factors. Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-15. Success of 1830 revolts. Influence of 1789 French Revolution. Economic hardships. Role of Polish intellectuals. Desire to regain independence. Desire to regain privileges. Collapse of Congress system. Heavy taxes. Death of Tsar Alexander I. Influence of Napoleon I's reforms. Russian brutality and destroyism. The effects of the Polish Revolt of 1830. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 22. However, Tsar Nicholas I sent over 100,000 Russian troops that crushed the revolution, and therefore the Poles were defeated. 2. The Polish Revolt led to increased Russian despotism and oppressive rule on Poland. After crushing the Polish Revolt, Tsar Nicholas I became more determined to crush any traces of forces of liberalism and nationalism in Poland that had been left behind by Tsar Alexander I. Tsar Nicholas I became more oppressive as he censored the Polish press, denied them parliamentary democracy as well as freedom of expression. 3. The Polish constitution was wiped out and a new one favoring the Russians was put in place, and this greatly tampered with the democracy of the Poles. 4. It led to the erosion of Polish culture and language. After the revolt, the Russian language became the official language in Poland, and the Polish language was banned and ignored by the Russians. 5. It led to increased religious intolerance in Poland. It should be noted that the Poles were Catholics by faith and the Russians were Orthodox Christians by faith. The Catholic Church, which was the main church in Poland, is persecuted, and Catholicism was not slowed by the Russian, and they made the Orthodox religion the official religion in Poland. 6. To the end of the revolt, the Polish Parliament Diet was abolished, i.e. Tsar Nicholas I had suspended the Polish Parliament in 1825, and it never set up to 1831 when it was finally abolished, and this denied the Poles the right to enjoy parliamentary democracy. 7. The Polish Revolt of 1830 led to an exodus of many people into exile. In the course of suppressing the Polish Revolt, Tsar Nicholas I became so brutal towards the Poles, and this forced many Poles To move to most Western European countries, e.g. about 80,000 Poles went into exile in Siberia and some Polish soldiers fled to Prussia where they were finally disarmed. 8. Administrative discrimination of the Poles continued after the revolt. Leading administrative positions in Poland were given to the Russians, which led to the further loss of Polish independence. 9. There was increased persecution of the Poles by the Russian administration. Public meetings were banned and the formation of Polish political parties was also banned, and this was deemed the Poles of their freedom of association and expression thereby. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 23. Then, the Polish army was dissolved and merged into the Russian army. Tsar Alexander I had allowed the Poles to have their own separate army. However, having a separate army partly encouraged the Poles to revolt. However, after the failure of the revolt, the Polish army was merged with the Russian army. Some soldiers who had taken part in the revolt were demoted into remote Russian regiments, while others were rounded up and arrested. 11. The Polish revolt led to the complete loss of Polish independence. After the revolt, Poland was incorporated into the bigger Russian Empire, even though Poland was allowed to have a separate government, i.e. Poland became a mere province of the bigger Russian Empire. 12. The failure of the 1830 Polish revolt laid a foundation for the rise of future Polish nationalism. The Poles were encouraged by the Polish revolt of 1830 to once again rise up against Russian foreign domination, and in 1863, the Poles rose up against the Russian administration of Tsar Alexander XI. 13. The Polish Revolt of 1830 led to the loss of lives as Russian troops clashed with Polish demonstrations. About 40,000 people perished and many were left wounded. 14. The Polish Revolt of 1830 led to the destruction of property. Public infrastructure like roads, buildings, and largely Russian installations was targeted by the Polish revolutionaries who tried to destroy them. 15. The Polish Revolt of 1830 led to the decline of the Polish economy. The Polish economy was no longer assisted by the Russians, as the case was during the time of Tsar Alexander I. Investments in agriculture and infrastructure were no longer extended to the Polish economy, and this led to economic decline in Poland. 16. The Polish Revolt of 1830 led to the closure of a number of Polish universities because they had been the center of mobilizing the masses to revolt. The University of Warsaw and the University of Vilna were closed down, and students' associations in these universities were banned. This greatly affected the education rights of the Poles. 17. The Polish peasants remained well and were not mistreated by the Russians because the majority of them did not take part in the revolt, and this somehow improved the status of the Polish peasants. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 24 wanted Louis Philippe to extend support to the Polish liberals and revolutionaries, whom he didn't, yet he was a product of the revolt. This made the French liberals oppose his administration until his downfall in 1848. 19. The Polish Revolt of 1830 exposed the weaknesses of the Metternich system. Metternich was opposed to liberalism and nationalism, and therefore he put in place a Metternich system, characterized by a strict police spy network that was intended to crush forces of liberalism and nationalism in Europe. However, the outbreak of the Polish Revolt exposed the weaknesses of the Metternich system, which was unable to stop the outbreak of the Polish Revolt in 1830. The reasons for the failure of the Polish Revolt 1830. 1. The Russians had a large army that outnumbered the Polish army. By September 1831, the Russians had raised about 100,000 troops compared to the Polish army that was less than half of the size of the Russian army. This numerical advantage of the Russian army enabled them to easily overwhelm and defeat the Polish Revolt in 1830. 2. There was no adequate preparation and organization of the revolt. The Poles were just inspired by the success of the Paris Revolt of July 1830 and Belgian Revolt of 1830, but they did not have prior planning of the revolution, which left the Polish revolutionaries disorganized, hence leading to the failure of the Polish Revolt of 1830. 3. The Poles lacked foreign assistance to support their cause. Britain continued to isolate herself mostly in cases where her interests were not in danger or she didn't have interests at all. Louis Philippe of France was busy settling down and setting his administration after the success of the 1830 July Paris Revolt, and therefore this left the Poles without any external help, which enabled the Russians to defeat the Polish revolutionaries in 1831. 4. The Poles had a small middle class which couldn't significantly contribute to the success of the Polish Revolt of 1830. The Polish Revolt was mainly dominated by university lecturers, professors, and students, and when the Russians closed down the universities of Warsaw and Vilna, Polish nationalism was silenced, hence leading to the defeat of the Polish Revolt of 1830. 5. The weakness of the Polish army also contributed to the failure of European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 25 unmotivated Russian troops that easily defeated the Polish army, thus leading to the failure of the Polish Revolt in 1831. 6. The Polish revolutionaries were divided, and this led to the failure of their revolt. The Polish moderates thought of reclaiming the eastern province of Poland that Russia had taken, and they were not so much concerned about any form of social change. The radicals, on the other hand, wanted reforms and national independence. Therefore, such divisions in ideology and interests undermined the unity of the Poles and consequently led to the failure of the 1830 Polish Revolt. 7. There was poor mobilization of the 1830 Polish Revolt, and it led to the failure of the revolt. The revolt was planned and championed by university intellectuals, and therefore the revolt was mainly planned in urban centres like Warsaw without involving the majority masses in the countrysides who were not mobilized to join the Polish cause, thus leading to the failure of the 1830 Polish Revolt. 8. Lack of support from the Polish peasants also led to the failure of the 1830 Polish Revolt. The Russians tended to be good to the Polish peasants, and they didn't mistreat them. E.g., in most of the areas captured by the Russian army, the Russians allowed the Polish peasants to enjoy some freedoms like freedom of worship, speech, expression, etc. That good attitude of the Russians towards the Polish peasants made the Polish peasants to help the Russian army in silencing the revolt, hence leading to the defeat of the Poles in 1831. 9. The outbreak of epidemics in Poland also led to the failure of the Polish Revolt in 1831. There was a cholera outbreak which weakened and claimed many lives of the Poles that did not get any reinforcements in form of medical care. This epidemic enabled the Russians to force the weakened, sick Polish revolutionaries to surrender, hence leading to the failure of the Polish Revolt in 1831. 10. Economic backwardness of the Poles also led to the failure of the Polish Revolt in 1831. The Poles were predominantly agriculturalists, and such an agrarian economy couldn't support prolonged revolts against the Russian. Besides, the Russians overtaxed the Poles, hence weakening them economically, thus making European history the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 26. The Polish masses to join the revolt, hence leading to the failure of the revolt in 1831. 12. The arrangements of the 1840-1815 Vienna Peace Settlement also led to the failure of the Polish Revolt in 1831. It should be recalled that the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-1815 placed Poland under Russian domination, i.e. the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-1815 officially gave Poland to Russia, and that was recognized by the European powers. Therefore, such official arrangement by Vienna Congress made Russia determined to crush the Polish Revolt so as to maintain her dominance over Poland, and that's why no other European powers came in to assist the Poles for fear of annoying not only Russia but also the Vienna peacemakers, i.e. Britain, Austria and Prussia, hence partly contributing to the failure of the Polish Revolt in 1831. Question for reference. 1. Account for the causes and effects of 1830 Polish Revolt. 2. The outbreak of 1830 Polish Revolt was inevitable. Discuss. 3. Account for the causes and defeat of 1830 Polish Revolt. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 27. The 1830 revolts in the Italian states. In 1830, revolts also broke out in the Italian peninsula, particularly in the Papal States, Naples and other states like Lombardy and Venetia that had been put directly under Austrian domination by the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814 and S. 1815. Also revolts broke out in the three central Italian duchies of Parma, Modena and Tuscany that were placed under Habsburg princes and were connected by marriage alliances. The causes of the 1831 Italian revolts. 1. The unfair arrangements of the Vienna Peace Settlement of 18,141,815 led to the outbreak of the Italian revolts of 1830. The Vienna Peace of 1840-1815 had placed Italian states under Austrian rule. The Italian states of Lombardy and Venetia were put under direct Austrian rule, likewise the three central Italian duchies were all connected by marriage ties by Austrian rulers. Therefore such an arrangement made the Italians to revolt against Austrian foreign rule. 2. The desire to attain independence also led to the outbreak of revolts in the Italian revolts in the Italian states. States like Lombardy and Venetia had been put under Austrian rule. This led European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1839. 28. 3. The desire for liberal and constitutional rule by many Italians led to the outbreak of the 1830 revolts in many Italian states. Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-1815 led to the restoration of legitimate rulers, e.g. many of the Habsburg rulers who were placed in Lombard and Venetia and other legitimate rulers who were restored by the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-15 were conservative reactionary, and therefore they were despotic and undemocratic. Therefore they disregarded liberal and constitutional rule, which forced the Italians to revolt in search for liberal and constitutional rule that would grant them their liberties and freedoms. 4. The Italians also desired to end the oppressive and despotic rule of the restored rulers. For instance, Ferdinand I Naples, the Pope in the Papal States and the ruler of Sicily were very despotic, e.g. they practiced arbitrary arrests and imprisonment of the people, censored the press, restricted the freedom of worship, freedom of movement and association, etc. Therefore such despotism, dictatorship and repressive rule drove the Italians into staging the 1830 revolts. 5. Some revolts broke out due to the harsh Metternich system. Metternich, who was the Chancellor of the Austrian Empire that also comprised the Italians, put in place a repressive harsh system to try and silence forces of nationalism. The Metternich system went along with a strict police bin at work, censorship of press, arbitrary arrest and persecution of political opponents. The Metternich system was so strict that one Italian woman is quoted to have remarked, "My daughter cannot sneeze, but Metternich will hear of it." Therefore, such a repressive Metternich system created discontent among the Italians, e.g. in the states of Lombardy and Venetia, hence forcing them to revolt against such a repressive system. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839, 29. 7. Napoleon I's reforms in the Italian states also influenced the outbreak of the 1830 revolts in the Italian states. Napoleon I had made a number of reforms in Italian states in 1807, part of the French Empire, like freedom of worship, association, speech, and above all he spread the French revolutionary ideas, i.e. equality, fraternity, and liberty. These Napoleonic reforms politically awakened the Italians, and when the Austrian foreign domination tried to abolish some of these reforms, there was resentment from the Italians, hence partly forcing them to stage the 1830 revolts in Italian states. 8. The censorship of the Italian press also led to the outbreak of 1830 revolts in Italian states. Prince Metternich, through his repressive system, censored the Italian press, any other critical publications, especially in the Italian states of Lombardy and Venetia, where the press was critically controlled and all school textbooks carefully censored. This created anger among the Italian educated elites and liberals, which forced them to mobilize Italian masses to revolt against Austrian oppressive foreign rule. 9. Language grievance in some Italian states also forced them to revolt in 1830. In the states that were under direct Austrian foreign control, i.e. Lombardy and Venetia, the German language was made the official language by Austrian administration, and the German language was the official language in all public places. Even street names were Germanized, which angered the Italian states, thus partly forcing the Italians to revolt against the Austrian foreign rule in 1830. Then, the weakness and eventual collapse of the Congress system in 1830 also encouraged the Italians to revolt in 1830. It should be noted that the Congress system was partly formed to enforce the arrangement of the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1814-1815. However, due to disagreements among the Congress powers, the concert had collapsed by 1830. The Congress system got divided over issues of revolt, i.e. liberal powers like Britain supported the revolts, being a liberal country, hence such weaknesses in the Congress system encouraged the Italian nationalists to revolt against Austrian foreign rule. 11. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 30. Venetia alone through tax revenue, hence such exploitation of the Italians forced them to revolt in 1830. 12. The role played by the Italian revolutionary leaders also contributed to the outbreak of 1830 revolts in Italian states. These included, among others, Mazzini, Garibaldi, etc. These exposed the evils of Austrian administration in the Italian peninsula, formed secret societies, e.g. Mazzini formed the Young Italy movement in 1831, and Garibaldi formed the 1,000 Red Shirt Army, and that helped to create a revolutionary mood among the Italians in the peninsula, mobilized the masses, recruited and trained, and above all coordinated the moves to revolt against Austrian foreign domination imposed on them by the Vienna peacemakers in 1815, hence leading to the outbreak of 1830 revolts in Italian states. 13. The widespread economic hardships in Italian states also led to the outbreak of 1830 revolts in Italian states. It should be noted that by 1830, the Italians were faced with a number of economic hardships such as inflation, massive unemployment, etc. However, the Austrian administration did little to solve those problems, and this angered the Italians, thereby partly forcing them to revolt in 1830 against their masters, the Austrians. 14. The inspiration from the 1789 French in France also led to the outbreak of the 1830 Italian revolts. It should be noted that the French Revolution of 1789 came along with revolutionary ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity, democracy, etc., and these ideas influenced the Italians to rise up against their Austrian fomenters, thus leading to the outbreak of 1830 revolts in the Italian states. 15. The success of the July 1830 revolt in France and the Belgian Revolt of 1830 also inspired the Italians to rise up against the Austrian foreign rule. The success of the Paris Revolt, hoping for similar success, thus leading to the outbreak of 1830 revolts in Italian Peninsula. European history, the Belgian Revolt, 1830-1839. 31. Italian nationalism, which was determined to end Austrian domination, and therefore it led to the outbreak of the 1848 revolutions in the Italian states. 3. The 1830 revolts in the Italian states exposed the unfairness of the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-1815. It should be recalled that the Vienna Congress of 1814-15 had imposed Austrian foreign domination over Italian states, and that undermined the spirit of Italian nationalism, and that made the Italians determined to undo what had been done by the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-15. Therefore, the outbreak of the 1830 revolts in the Italian states exposed how unfair the Vienna Peace Settlement of 1840-1815 was. 4. The Italian revolts of 1830 exposed the weakness of the Metternich system and the weakness of the 1820 Tropo Protocol promote conservation in Europe by suffocating forces of liberalism and nationalism. However, the outbreak of the 1830 revolts in the Italian states revealed or exposed that the Metternich system was weak and ineffective. 5. The outbreak of the 1830 revolts in the Italian states weakened the Congress system further and finally contributed to its collapse. The Congress powers were once again divided over the question of the Italian revolts. Britain was in support of these liberal revolts in the Italian states. However, on the other hand, conservation powers like Austria, Prussia, and Russia wanted to suppress these revolts, and they split the Congress system, thereby weakening it and contributing to its collapse by 1830. 6. The outbreak of the 1830 revolts in the Italian states led to the strengthening of conservatism in the Italian states. Metternich and the Austrian administration became more repressive than before. Metternich tightened his system where he censored the press further, banned the teaching of liberal subjects, banned immigrations and emigrations. All these repressive measures were done so as to kill the spirit of Italian nationalism. 7. The 1830 revolts in Italian states resulted into loss of lives as the Austrian forces battled with Italian nationalists. It's estimated that over 10,000 people were killed during the revolts in the Italian states. Besides, many Italian nationalists and revolutionary leaders were arrested, imprisoned or forced into exile. G. Mazzini. European History of the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. 32. Agriculture and industry which left most Italian states economically weakened. 9. The outbreak of 1830 Italian revolts undermined the popularity of Louis Philippe in France, and consequently it contributed to his downfall by 1848. The French liberals and glory seekers expected and wanted Louis Philippe to extend moral, financial, and military support to the Italians' liberals and nationalists as they tried to fight against Austrian foreign domination. However, Louis Philippe didn't extend support to the Italians' liberals, which left the French liberal and glory seekers Bonapartists disappointed, and thereafter they became strong critics of Louis Philippe's administration until his downfall in 1848. Then, the suppression of the 1830 revolts in the Italian state exposed the weakness of the Italian nationalists and the secret societies. Italian secret groups like the Carbonari movement and the Young Italy movement were discredited for failure to defeat the Austrians, and their work ended in 1830 only to resurrect again in 1848. Reasons for failure of Italian revolts of 1830. 1. Lack of external support, i.e. Louis Philippe. The Italian nationalists failed to secure foreign assistance to support their cause. Britain kept herself in isolation, and she didn't come out rightly to assist the Italian nationalists, and that enabled the European History of the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. 33. Network that monitored the activities of Italian nationalists. The Metternich system helped to crush any elements of Italian nationalists, which led to the failure of the Italian revolts of 1830. 3. The secret societies were weak with no proper political agenda. G. Mazzini and his Carbonari group were a group of charcoal burners whose economic activity couldn't raise adequate funds to support revolutionary activities of the Italian nationalists, and that explains why the activities of these societies couldn't succeed, hence leading to the failure of the 1830 Italian revolts. 4. The censorship of the Italian press also led to the failure of the 1830 revolt. Prince Metternich strictly censored the Italian press, especially in Lombardy and Venetia, where any critical publications against Metternich and his system were not allowed in circulation. The censoring of the Italian press therefore undermined the mobilization of the Italian masses to join the revolts against Austrian rule. 5. The fiscal policies adopted by Metternich in the Italian states also led to the failure of the 1831 Italian revolts. Metternich imposed heavy taxes on the Italian masses and deliberately did not develop them economically. Such policies left the Italian states economically weak and thus unable to challenge the Austrians, who had a lot of resources at their disposal that they used to defeat the 1830 Italian revolts. 6. The Italians had a weak middle class, and that led to the failure of 1830 Italian revolts. There was no capable leadership to spearhead the revolts. Leaders like Giuseppe Mazzini operated from exile, and this left the Italian revolutionaries with no proper coordination in their revolts, hence leading to the failure of 1830 Italian revolts. 7. The military weakness of the Italian states also led to the failure of the Italian revolts of 1830. The Austrians had built a strong 1830. The Austrians had built a strong, formidable army which was well-equipped, trained, and disciplined. With this strong army, Austria was able to easily defeat the Italian armies that were ill-equipped and ill-trained, hence leading to the defeat of 1813. Italian revolts. 8. The social backwardens of the Italian revolts of 1830. Metternich deliberately kept Italian masses socially. European History, the Belgian Revolt 1830-1839. 34. 9. The divide and rule policy of Metternich also helped to frustrate Italian nationalism, hence leading to the failure of 1830 Italian revolts. The Austrian Empire was made up of about 13 nationalities, e.g. it was made up Italians, Germans, Austrians, Croats, Hungarians, Slavs, etc., and it was Metternich's habit to play one nationality against the other, which always made these nationalities to fight one another, hence weakening themselves in the process, and that is why the Italian 1830 revolts against Metternich were a failure in 1830. Then, the imposition of the Germany language on the Italian revolts of 1830. Austria imposed the Germany language on the Italians, especially in the states of Lombardy and Venetia, and it became the official language at the expense of Latin, which was the traditional language of the Italians. The ease of this foreign language made it hard to mobilize and sensitize the Italian masses to join the 1830 revolts against Austrian foreign rule.